TFL EV is brought to you by Flow Charger, maker of reliable, high-quality charging stations for your electric vehicle.
All right, hey everyone. Today we just want to talk about the federal tax credit in electric vehicles because you see this a lot on manufacturers' websites, right? Making EVs more affordable, but there's a lot of confusion out there. So Nathan's with me in the studio today.
Hey guys.
And Nathan, can you just introduce what is the concept of the federal tax credit? Who gets it? What does it mean?
Okay, very simple. I'm going to break it down, but you just brought it up, that a lot of automakers are putting on there that you will get this $7,500 tax credit. You may not. Unfortunately, people think that right when they go to the dealership and buy themselves a brand new EV, that they're going to cut off $7,500 from whatever the grand total is. That's not the case. For 2010 and up cars that are electric with a battery of a certain size, you can get this federal tax credit if you're in the right tax bracket. And essentially what you can do is claim the $7,500 and have that knocked off of your taxes. But once again, it depends on what bracket you're in. Now on top of that, you can get in certain states additional state credits for the vehicle you buy. It works exactly the same way. So you're not going to get that discount. For instance, in Colorado, it's up to, I believe, $2,500. You're not going to get that cut off at the top of your vehicle and drop down an additional $2,500. You can get up to that and claim it potentially if you're in the right bracket. So it depends on what type of financial level you are at and whether or not you can make the full claim or the partial claim. Also, very important to remember, in some cases with a new enough used electric vehicle, some states will give you a credit, and so you should look into that.
Yeah, no, the individual state incentives are a great additional bonus. And on the federal side of things, it is, I think, there's been some criticism, you can decide for yourself if it's warranted or not, that these tax credits really only benefit people who honestly have enough money to spend on these cars in the first place. It's not the type of thing where it's the make or break decision of you buying the vehicle. It's more of a, oh, sweet, I get some money back at the end of the year. Potentially,
right,
if I'm in a certain tax bracket.
Exactly. So keep that in mind if you're going out there for the very first time to buy an EV or certain PHEVs that have a large enough battery.
Yes. Today, though, we have on our list a lot of EVs you can buy. In fact, basically just about every EV sold in the U.S. that still qualifies. So notable exceptions are Tesla. Tesla ran out of their credits a while ago, and General Motors, because they've sold a lot of Bolts, right? Yeah, so our first vehicle on the list alphabetically is actually the Audi e-tron SUV, which is not exactly a new vehicle, also not a particularly exciting vehicle, but still luxurious, still pretty fast. Can you tell us a little bit about it, Nathan?
Yeah, actually, a very interesting thing happened recently. One of our viewers sent us video of them off-roading with their e-tron, and it was crazy, but it did really well, and it was really strange for us because we're like, you really want to do that, guy? We didn't tell you to do it. Sent us this video, so it's out there. He actually did it on a Dude I Love My Car or Do I Love My Ride video series, and it did pretty good. Unfortunately, these are not the most efficient vehicles out there in terms of the range, despite their high price. So, realistically, close to $70,000 for one of these things.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you're not even able to break the 250-mile barrier that I find to be one of the earliest levels.
Right. EPA range, which is actually pretty realistic, is 222 miles, which I think in today's market with the really competitive newer EVs out there, it's not great.
It's not. Not compared to some of the competitors out there. But the next one on the list actually is one of my favorites, only based on the way it looks. And that is the Audi e-tron GT. I think it's one of the best looking EVs out there. Look at that. Oh, beautiful, beautiful car.
Beautiful car, and also it's essentially based off the Porsche Taycan, which has received a very fair amount, I think, of accolades for how exciting it is, how fast it is.
Oh, ridiculoly fast.
So this is basically a Taycan that is very similar in price, just
right,
for those who want that Audi styling.
Yeah, exactly. 800-volt architecture. But a phenomenal car to drive. Now, I've only driven the Porsche, its cousins, but if it drives as good or nearly as good as that Porsche, then it will be extraordinary.
Right, and this is exactly the kind of vehicle where, if you can afford this, you probably are eligible for the tax credit.
Mm-hmm.
Not that it's going to probably impact your buying decision too much, but hey, with Audi, maybe that saves you on an option or two.
Precisely. There's another Audi on the list too, by the way, and that is the Audi Q450 e-tron Quattro. It has a slightly better range than the e-tron SUV. We've been seeing these things going around Nürburgring. We've been seeing them testing around other areas in Germany and I believe even Italy. And it really does look like a regular, Q3, Q4, Q5 type thing. So regular crossover, but it's all electric.
And it's a little bit more modern than the e-tron, just plain SUV, right? Because this is, like you said, it's just kind of looks like a normal Q3 or Q5, somewhere in between.
Yeah.
It's cheaper. It starts at about $50,000. And because it's newer, it's more put together, more mature EV. It has more range.
Yeah, exactly. 241 miles, I believe. And yeah, it's starting at $44,000, which actually is not bad for a luxury crossover in this class.
Right. So it's more compact, a little bit less luxurious than that original e-tron.
Sure.
But honestly, probably the more pragmatic vehicle to get.
I would agree. Should we move on?
Yes. And we're into the Bs now with the BMW i3, which is actually not being made anymore.
Yeah, they just stopped it recently. It's an extraordinary vehicle, though. For those of you guys who don't know, it's not a simple EV, or in this case, actually, technically, it is the very definition of a PHEV, too, if you get the range extender. Essentially, this is a vehicle that has all bespoke components when it comes to its cockpit and the overall build of it. It's the tub that it's based on. It's only built for this vehicle. Super light, super strong, very safe. We actually owned one at TFL Studios, and Andre bought it off the studios and gave it to his wife.
Yeah, I think he really liked it because it's really, like you said, it's got that really bespoke, essentially space-age steel technology.
Yeah, it still is.
All the use of carbon fiber, super cool vehicle concept. It's rear-wheel drive, so enthusiasts, listen up on that. Its only downsides are really the fact that its range is not quite great. It's a little over 100 miles, and it's got quite the skinny tires.
Yeah, which some people really don't like in snow country, although it worked fine for me. One pedal driving you can do with this. I drove both the regular electric one and the one with the range extender, which essentially is a scooter engine that works as a generator to supply more power to the battery when things get low. And it has a small 2-gallon gas tank. That's it, just 2 gallons. So you can drive it, and that really does extend the range. It more than doubles it, I believe. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So while you can't buy these new anymore, you're not getting the federal tax credit, the used values on these have been pretty great for the last few years, even in this current market. So used ones are always great. And like Nathan was mentioning, if you live in a state where you might qualify for a used EV tax credit or some kind of incentive, this could be a sweet deal.
Very easy to look up online, and I do recommend doing that. By the way, I really do like driving these things. They're so much fun. It's a hoot to drive. Personal thing there. All right, should we move on to the BMW i4, which is the eDrive 40 and the 50. Now, this is a vehicle that it starts at $55,000, but you go to $65,000 for the M50. Now, you're suddenly in a completely different world in terms of performance. This is not what I would call a family vehicle. This is a performance vehicle that happens to have wicked good range for what it is in my book, and incredible speed. And we actually produced a video where we drag raced this vehicle against certain other ones, and it was a beast.
Yeah, and I think you can't deny people will compare this inevitably to the Model 3 Performance, which, by the way, is not eligible for tax credits like we mentioned.
Right.
This will, while it's priced higher, might work out similarly with the tax credit. I think undeniably appeal to fans of BMW styling. It is not a frog. It's not a Model 3.
Yeah.
It's got its BMW charm.
As a matter of fact, it's built on the same assembly line as the regular BMW series that this vehicle is built on. So in other words, the platform, the suspension, most of the bodywork, the interior, a lot of that is shared with the regular internal combustion version of that BMW, which is, I think, extraordinary.
Extraordinary in some ways, yeah, because it's great bodywork. Critics of it, I think the EV purists will say, oh, it's not a ground-up EV vehicle. You can tell that. It's a little bit heavier than it should be.
Yeah.
It's got less space than it should have on the interior because they're still packaging some of that, legacy components, but still a great vehicle.
Yeah, I would agree on that, and really, really fast. Shall we move on?
Yeah.
Brand new is the BMW iX, and that one starts at $84,000 for the xDrive 50 and $109,000 for the M60. And once again, pretty decent range between 288 and 324 miles. This is, I believe there was a very popular commercial during the Super Bowl where Arnold Schwarzenegger was running around in this thing as Zeus and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Fun commercial. But anyway, we haven't driven this yet, or at least I haven't. I don't think Roman has either. But this one does promise to be right up there with the Tesla Model X in terms of its overall appeal and the audience it's going towards, and also its capability. Some of the range numbers are impressive.
Yeah, and the style is certainly polarizing given it's got BMW's new large grille and their new design language. You either love it or hate it. But like Nathan was saying, BMW spared no expense on this vehicle. They had the Arnold Schwarzenegger Super Bowl ad. It's got a soundtrack designed by Hans Zimmer, because that's a thing with electric vehicles now, right? You have a soundtrack to your car. So this is, a flagship vehicle, and like you said, it has the range and the numbers to back it up. And unfortunately, also the price tag.
Indeed, but it's a BMW, and so a lot of people just immediately say, well, it's a BMW, so the price is justified. Now, a vehicle that costs almost exactly half would be the next one on our list, which is the Ford Mustang Mach-E, and we have a lot of experience with the Mach-E. The range, now you can get a rear drive or all-wheel drive version of them. The range goes between 224 miles and 314 miles, and it depends on the battery as well, because there's a couple different battery sizes you can get with this vehicle. A lot of good, a little bit of bad on this one. So go ahead and take it away. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think right off the bat, most of the reviews, like you were saying, Roman, we really liked it, TFL, and also just I think the internet is generally in love with this car, except for the fact that it's called a Mustang.
Exactly. Yeah, that's like the biggest issue. I wouldn't call it a Mustang. I just call it a Mach-E without the Mustang part, because it's not a Mustang.
Yeah, and I think most people would agree it is in some ways a better Model Y. However, people will point this out in the comments. Inevitably, this has been a news story lately. A lot of recalls in this vehicle.
A lot of recalls. And there's another issue, which is the Model Y has a better ride, and the Model Y doesn't have a great ride. One of the problems with the Mach-E, especially the performance versions of them, is that the ride is extremely harsh. And we actually went out and did a couple videos, and we talked about that. We got yelled at by a lot of fanboys, but that's the truth. That's what we felt. And another issue that some people have is the fact that the cargo capacity of the Mustang Mach-E is not up there with the Model Y. The Model Y actually is more accommodating. So there are some differences there, but all in all, in terms of driving and dynamics and range, it's quite good.
Yes, and it's one of the few Model Y competitors that also does have a front trunk, because Ford seems to believe in those. And on the note of the recalls, those seem to affect the earlier ones, right? It seems like the newer ones have it more sorted out. So if you've got an older one, take it in, obviously, but seems fixable. It's a big news story, but I think Ford has it under control.
I would agree, and I believe we have that story on TFLcar.com. Let's move up to another Ford product, and their second what I think is a grand slam in terms of their introduction, and that's the Ford F-150 Lightning, which we're doing a lot with. We bought one for the studio, and we're going to be doing some crazy stuff with it.
Yeah, not exactly little-known truck, right? This thing has kind of, I think, blown up into the mainstream. When it debuted. The president took a ride in it. It's a very popular vehicle with, I think everybody, with fans of electric vehicles, with fans of trucks. And it starts at, theoretically, at least if you get the Pro trim, just under $40,000. That's
right. But in order to get the Pro, you have to have it in a fleet for that particular Pro, for the really cheap one. You can get the Pro model, but it has to be the larger battery version of it, and that suddenly makes it a lot more expensive. And that one anybody can buy. But in theory, if you have a fleet, you can buy a $40,000 Ford F-150 Lightning with a 230-mile range, all-wheel drive, four-wheel independent suspension, the cab, all of that, it comes standard, and it's a pretty damn remarkable vehicle.
Yeah, and it does get expensive. If you get the Platinum, it goes to $90,000, but it is a real F-150. You get a lot. We've had the Platinum in the garage for a bit, and I think we're pretty impressed by it as well.
Right, and to move on, General Motors, now they've just run out of their credit. Other automakers have as well, meaning that they've built enough, in this case, bolts, to go past that point where they're getting the money back as well and making an inexpensive bid to build a vehicle, right? But they still do build a very inexpensive EV that I think is quite good, even though it had a massive recall recently, and that's the Bolt EUV and the regular Bolt. The Chevy Bolt has been around now for 5 years or so, and I think it's an outstanding little runabout. It has excellent range, really good power, not a whole lot of space, but the EUV has more space in it. Not all-wheel drive, even though they kind of make it look like a crossover. It still doesn't have all-wheel drive.
Yeah, so I think despite the long shadow over this vehicle of it, no longer getting the tax credit, having those pretty disastrous recalls, it's actually helping buyers of it now because GM, on account of that recall, has discounted it quite a lot.
Which is crazy. So it's actually one of the least expensive, it is the least expensive electric vehicle you can buy, and the range is outstanding. It does outperform the equivalent Nissan Leaf, both in range and in performance in my book, although the Leaf is a more comfortable vehicle. Regardless, Chevrolet still has these things. They're inexpensive. I think they discounted them because they don't get the tax credit anymore. And that makes sense as well. So it's still a really good bargain. I do recommend looking at them.
And I think just this came out recently, but the 2020 and 2021 owners of this might be eligible for a $5,000 rebate from GM on account of the battery issues.
Which is just fantastic. So, yeah, it did have a massive recall, but that's all done, I believe, and now they are selling them. So keep that in mind. The next one, I think, is one of the more interesting looking EVs that has come out, and that is the Genesis GV60. It's like the Ioniq 5, but it has more goodies, it's fancier. I think it looks cool. It's a remarkably unique vehicle in the class, and frankly, Hyundai, Kia, and Genesis have been hitting it out of the park with their technology.
Yeah, undeniable. That eGMP platform, kind of like the Taycan and the new e-tron GT, actually 800-volt charging. What those nerdy numbers mean is that it charges incredibly quickly. It's a very state-of-the-art vehicle, and it's $71,000 to start with. It's Genesis luxury pricing, but you get 240-ish miles of range, which is very decent. And I have to give massive props to Genesis for just calling this the GV60. Right? I think that's a lot of boldness and show of faith when every other company seems to want to put some acronym or title on their EV to tell you that it's an EV.
Yeah, I thought they were going to call it the EV60. Seriously, when they were initially showing the concept of it, and by the way, it looks a lot like the concept, which I love the fact that they carried the design over. Well done for them. The next, of course, speaking of Hyundai, is the Hyundai Ioniq 5, which is currently, at least if you're curious, my personal favorite, and also winner of the World Card Award for a very good reason. One of the best electric vehicles currently being sold regardless of price. Its tech, its ride, its handling, and its range, I think, make it outstanding.
Yes, and also almost a little bit like the Bolt, this might have a slight stain on it from associations with the original Hyundai Ioniq, which is a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle.
Yeah, they made an electric Ioniq original as well, but that was a totally different vehicle. But this vehicle, if you like hatchbacks and ridiculous amounts of space and comfort, and a very good car, an awful lot of journalists absolutely agree with the World Car Awards that this should be there, and rightfully so. It's that good.
The styling is just great.
Isn't it fantastic?
Yeah.
It's a great looking. I'd love to own one. All right, now speaking once again of Hyundai, we are now on Kia. Oh no, sorry, we're still on Hyundai, but we're on the Kona Electric. Now the Hyundai Kona has recently been updated, and it actually is a better vehicle than the one it replaces in terms of space, in terms of capability. It starts at $34,000 and has up to a 258-mile range, which is better than other comparable vehicles it competes against.
Right. So I think anyone will tell you from looking at it, this is not up there with the Ioniq 5, but significantly more bang for your buck because you're still getting essentially the same range as some of the lower-end Ioniq 5s at a very palatable price.
Right, and it actually, in many ways, outpaces the equivalent Nissan Leaf, which it competes directly against, which we'll get to the Nissan Leaf in just a minute, but I do think that's impressive that they're able to do that with a vehicle that shares its platform with internal combustion versions as well.
Yeah, it's a very well-done adaptation, just like the BMW i4, just in a different price bracket.
Exactly. All right, and the next one is actually one of the older vehicles on this list, and it's sort of an ironic thing, and that's the Jaguar I-Pace. Now, we drove one almost 2 years ago, I think. Roman actually took one on some light off-roading, $71,000, but the price has gone down actually for some new models. 234-mile range. Now, here's my issue. I think this is a brilliant car to look at, and I did drive one briefly, and it drove great. It really did. Did it drive like a Jaguar? No, but then again, it's all right, I guess. I think that the range needs to be addressed for a car in this price bracket. It should be close to $300 to be competitive. Otherwise, I think it was brilliant. It was a great car to drive, very comfortable.
Yeah, it seems like the deals to be had now, if there are deals in EVs, is to look for these older kind of first generation electric products that have now been discounted because they're not quite as state of the art, they're not bleeding edge, yet they're still fine vehicles. And in the case of the I-Pace, not class leading range, but workable range.
It's still workable range, I would agree. And if it's a great third or second car to have if you don't need something to go long distance. Really, once again, comfortable, stylish. I thought it was a great car. Shall we move on?
Yes. Our next vehicle is the Kia Niro EV.
Oh, yeah. Now, I recently got a chance to get a lot of exposure to this vehicle. Unfortunately, nobody's driven the brand new one yet. The one that's featured here is actually the 2022, but they now have a 2023 model on an all-new platform, and that one is more capable. It actually has better styling, has a larger internal cockpit, has slightly better performance, all new vehicle. And they are fairly affordable, $39,000, 239-mile battery range, and it is a really good value. But there's additional things to know. That is that there's other Kia Niros, including a plug-in hybrid version, which I do not believe has a large enough battery to make it capable of getting the federal credit, but you might be able to get a state credit on it. So look for that. And it's quite good in terms of its capability as well.
Yes. Again, not the looker of the lineup, but an undeniably good value.
Yeah, and the newer one I think is better looking than the current model. Okay. And you'll find that story on TFLcar.com, by the way. We cover it ad nauseum. Shall we move on? More Kia. The Kia EV6, which is the cousin, or if not brother, of the Hyundai Ioniq 5, but they're very different in terms of their personality.
Yes. So once the image loads here, this car is also very, I think, attractively styled, but it is much more aggressive than the Ioniq 5.
Yes.
It is a little bit less luxurious, a little bit more sporty in its personality. I've not been in either one, but from what I'm familiar with, I think it's got a little bit of a firmer suspension, right?
You're absolutely right on all counts. Firmer suspension, if you look at the rake of the windshield and everything else, it feels like a sports car by comparison, whereas then the Ioniq 5 is a much more gentle feeling everyday driver, which can still move. This one, the Kia absolutely tears up the road and feels like it's a sports car. So very different vehicles in terms of their overall personality. I would say that the EV6 actually competes directly with the Mustang Mach-E in terms of its overall feel, right?
Yeah.
And at $40,000, and it can go up to 339 miles. That is outstanding. A very interesting vehicle, and another one that's quite good. But I do like its brother a little bit better personally.
Yeah, I think the Ioniq 5 styling speaks to some people more, but I don't think the EV6 is bad looking either. And it's important to note, because of its design, which is a little bit different, it seems to be more aerodynamic, which is giving it 339 miles of range, a little bit more than comparable Ioniq 5s.
Yeah, I would agree. So, but also one final part is that the Ioniq 5 has a little bit more of a comfortable cockpit because you don't have to sit as low and you're not squished down with the low roof. Very big differences there. Let's move on, though, to a vehicle that you and Roman just recently got a chance to experience, and it's one of the most extraordinary new EVs out there because of its crazy range and performance, and that is the Lucid Air.
Yeah, so undeniably, I think this is a high-tech vehicle. Lucid's flagship, if you will, their statement piece. I think this comes from their basically racing technology. And it would be hard to deny that Lucid's not making very high-performance, luxury-grade stuff, but this vehicle is pretty expensive. I think it goes from about $78,000 all the way to well over $140,000.
Right. I believe they will be introducing an even cheaper one, or a less expensive one, I should say, that's rear drive in the near future, but it's not currently on their website. I just looked at this website. And by the way, the build is available. You can go onto their website and build your vehicle, but you'll notice there aren't a lot of options available.
Tends to be the case with these startups, right? They're still figuring out their inventory.
Right.
And on the note of, that Pure is going to be that base one, that cheaper one. The Air Grand Touring, which is what Roman and I actually drove with the reps in the back seat, was $154,000 MSRP. An expensive vehicle, but I think something significant that Lucid differentiates with, even from Tesla, is that range.
516 miles. That's record breaking. It is the best in class and one of the best ever for an electric vehicle. Now there is a new one that is a solar powered one that I believe beat it, but It's not in mass production. This is a mass-produced vehicle that you can buy today, in theory. And it gives you up to 516 miles. Bear in mind, it's only this trim. I don't think the other trims offer that. I believe it drops down to 400 and change for some of the other ones.
Yes.
But nonetheless, you still get ridiculous horsepower. You have a very luxurious cockpit that's all high-tech as well, right?
Yes, and it's not only the range and the that number that matters, it charges quickly. I think they told us it's a 900-volt battery architecture.
Which is the most, I believe, out there. 800 volts was like the record for a while, right?
Right.
Incredible. That's a lot of power to shut. Well, bottom line is that you'll be able to utilize high power when you have to go outside your home and power that thing up. It's crazy.
Another vehicle where, if you can afford this, I don't think the tax credit's too relevant, but lucky you, because it's a great car.
Exactly. Precisely. All right, let's move on to a vehicle which I think is one of the more disappointing ones on this list, but for a good reason, and that's the Mazda MX-30. Now, they do start at $34,000, which is a bit of a bargain for the class. However, they only have a 100-mile range. It's essentially a city car. The thing is that when they initially debuted the vehicle, it was supposed to have a rotary-powered range extender, and that didn't happen. That's a whole different story, but once again, that's on our website. But because of that, they introduced a vehicle that basically can go 100 miles before you have to juice it up, and it's just not acceptable in a market where a vehicle for this price, you can get double, almost triple the mileage.
Mazda has a lot of good, I think, well-established credibility with enthusiasts because of exciting cars like the Miata. Even their mass products like the CX-5 are really fun to drive.
They're excellent, yeah.
And the MX-30, I think, is also dynamically a good vehicle, but like Nathan was telling you, that range is just not good for the price.
Now, supposedly they've taken care of that, and there will be a range extender coming out fairly soon, if it hasn't already hit the market, but we haven't had a chance to play with that one yet, and that will, of course, change the mileage. And I think in the very near future, you're going to see a bunch of other products from Mazda that will make up for the MX-30. It's a real shame because I'm a bit of a fanboy for Mazda because their performance is always good, and their cars are always fun, but in this case, it's a bit of a letdown. The next one is a vehicle we do have some experience with, and that's the Mercedes-Benz EQS. It looks good from the side, but I really can't stand the front end of it. The EQS essentially is very similar to, let's say, the Mercedes-Benz S in terms of its packaging and overall bracket that it's in. However, completely different car in terms of powertrain and platform.
Also different personalities. I think Case and Tommy both compared an S-Class and an EQS, right?
That's right.
And with the S-Class, you're getting that that noise, which I think a lot of people like as the personality of this luxurious vehicle that makes its presence known on the highway. The EQS is almost the opposite, right? It's designed to be slippery like a fish. It's super aerodynamic. It's super quiet. So it's still luxurious, but it doesn't quite have, in my opinion, the character of an S-Class.
Does have four-wheel steering that's available, which works incredibly well. We played with that. And Roman and I, when we drove it, had a great time with it. Between a 340 and a 350 mile range, which is also outstanding.
Yes, so very impressive range and undeniable. It's Mercedes, it's a luxury.
One final thing about it, the AMG's version of this, which is $147,000, but the range drops to 277 miles, and I suppose it has to do with probably the extra output. But that's just a guess. I don't know for sure.
Yeah, less efficiency on that.
Jumping from one German to another, the Mini Cooper, yes, German, Mercedes or BMW-based components and all that. Mini Cooper SE hardtop. We have one, so we know a lot about them.
Yes, and there's a lot of videos on the channel about that. Most recently, another hot EV we've discussed, the Lightning rescued the Mini by charging it because the Mini. Great little car based off the i3 inherits that problem where the range is really city range, not highway range.
110 miles, and you guys managed to put 116 on the one that you drove before it had to be rescued, which is impressive. The bottom line is that it really is built for the city. You drive it around and usually put 30 or 40 miles on it, come back home, plug it in, and you're good for the next day. And that's the whole point of it. However, Mini already indicated that they are building a bunch of electric vehicles. This is one of their early entries into this. And I think that part of the reason why you don't have much range is because it's a very small car and there's only so much room and weight capacity for a bigger battery. but I think you're going to see these things gain range and power in the very near future.
Yeah, I think it was smart of Mini to put this in the two-door Cooper first, because despite giving it that low range, it's still a pretty lightweight, fun car to drive around. I enjoyed it.
Yep, and bear in mind one more thing, and that is that Mini does build a plug-in hybrid, which is based on their Clubman, which is their four-door hatchback, essentially kind of sort of a crossover. And that's a totally different beast. So keep that in mind. It exists as well.
I believe the Countryman S All-4 plug-in, I'm forgetting the exact full name, is also one of the most expensive models Mini makes.
It is. We have actually looked at owning one. But the cool thing about it is gas-powered front wheels, electric-powered rear wheels. You can actually put it in all-electric drive and do donuts in the snow using electric power. I've done it because I'm an idiot, but it was fun. All right, let's move on to the Nissan Leaf. We've been talking about this for a little while.
This is a vehicle you can speak a lot towards, Nathan, I think.
Yes, I can, because I actually have a later first generation with the bigger 30 kilowatt hour battery, which could give you up to 100 miles range when new. Or you can also say that I have experience with the new one because my brother bought a 2019 model, which essentially is the one that we're seeing up here, which has, I think, has just around 190 to 200 mile range on it. The new one goes up to 212. There's pluses and minuses with the Nissan Leaf. Its mileage and its price are quite good. And you'll notice on their main page, it says starting MSRP is $27,800, and then right below it in fairly big writing, it says as low as $20,300. That's assuming that you get federal tax credit. Don't ever assume that, okay? Because you may not get it. Look at the main price of it, the MSRP. Anyway, very good, solid vehicle. One of the earliest mass-produced modern electric vehicles out there. Over time, they've improved, but they still do not have certain things that you want, like a heat pump. They still require air to heat and cool their batteries to a certain degree. All of that means that these vehicles are somewhat dependent on the environment that they live in. As such, if you have a cold area or a super hot area that you're driving in, your mileage will suffer. The one I have, which is the 30 kilowatt hour battery, is super cheap because it's a used car. I've paid almost nothing on maintenance over 2 years. And it's been a fantastic vehicle, and I was able to get a little bit of money back from the state, even though it was a used EV. So, bottom line, very inexpensive vehicle. Not the least expensive, though. You can get, for less money, the Chevy Bolt, which I think is a superior vehicle, even though the Nissan Leaf has more space.
Also, I believe the Nissan Leaf is still in the second generation using CHAdeMO, which is not the fast charger of choice for us folks in the US.
That's a really good point. CHAdeMO is still available, though, at some hotspots, including a market just down the street from here, which has level 3 charging, and you are able to fast charge it using CHAdeMO. CHAdeMO is a round setup for fast charging, and it's different than modern fast chargers available in most other vehicles, which essentially goes from your J1772, and then you open the second section there, and you can plug in the larger fast charger. This is separate, and not all vehicles have it. Currently, I believe Nissan is one of the last ones to use it, and I believe they're phasing that out as well.
Yeah, so that is another kind of example of legacy tech on this, for the time, quite revolutionary car that is starting to age.
It's aging big time. Let's move on, though, to the Polestar 2. Very interesting vehicle.
Yeah, this one, I'll be honest, it speaks to me a lot because I love the new Volvos, how they look. Polestar shares a lot of heritage with Volvo, but what they're doing is they're a fully electric brand with the weird exception of their first car, which was a hybrid. But let's disregard that. The Polestar 2 is actually a really compelling Model 3 competitor, which doesn't quite match it on range. I think it's about 249 to 270 miles.
Right.
Depends on if you get...
Which is just under what the equivalent Model 3 will do.
Yes, and you can get this in a single or dual motor all-wheel drive configuration. A lot of these cars in the list, that configuration choice will impact your range. But starting at $46,000, that's not too bad.
No, it's not bad at all. I agree with you. I think that it's stunning to look at, especially in person. All of the Polestars that I've seen so far, the design is crisp and modern, yet it still kind of gives you a little bit of a Volvo vibe. And if you're a Volvo fan, that's great. If you're not, it could be a problem. But nonetheless, I think a very dynamic vehicle. I've driven the original Polestar. It was decent. And I'm very curious to how the modern ones drive. And in the very near future, we are going to see a very cool-looking crossover SUV coming too.
Yeah, and we've had a lot of news about Polestar and TFLcar.com too. A lot of exciting things coming in store from them. They also differentiate it because it runs Android in the interior. So what that means is you're getting like Google Maps. You have to sign in with a Google account. So that'll be another thing where you either love that if you're a techie like me, or if you're kind of phobic to that, you're going to hate it.
Yeah, exactly. It is a service that you do, I believe, have to pay for. Am I correct?
You don't because it's Google, but if you depending on how tinfoil hatty you want to get or your trust in our data economy, you are essentially handing a lot of that over to Google.
There you go. So something to keep in mind. Let's move over to the Porsche Taycan because that is another extraordinary vehicle, one that had a little bit of controversy at first, but it's still one of the fastest vehicles on here that has 4 doors. It is a remarkably capable vehicle, but there are a couple little issues here.
Yes. So this, like the e-tron GT, is just expensive.
Yeah.
It starts at $86,000 for the very kind of simplest rear-wheel drive ones. It goes to well over $130,000. Its range is by no means, I think, amazing. It's around 200, a little over miles. But that's because this is not a car you're driving to hypermile. This is a fun, fast car.
Although we did try to hypermile it, we actually have a series where Roman and his son decide to drive this cross-country from California to Colorado. And having a vehicle that has a maximum of 212 miles range, and we're not talking highway, which is where you lose a ton of range. It took a long time for them to get it here. So if you're thinking about cross-country driving, this is not your car. But otherwise, in terms of handling and performance and interior design, extraordinary.
And for all you wagon fans out there, especially you progressive wagon fans who have been begging for an EV wagon, well, I think this is like your only option still in the US, at least for a sporty, performance-oriented one, if you get the Taycan Cross Turismo.
Now, I still haven't fully understood why Porsche decides to use the word turbo when they're actually talking about an electric powertrain. I know it's got more beef to it, more performance perhaps, but it's not a turbocharger. So anyway, at some point in time, I'm sure someone will break it down into small words and explain it to me. Shall we move on, though, to Rivian, another vehicle, another automaker that we have a lot of experience with now. The R1T is their pickup truck, and the R1S is their 3-row crossover SUV.
Yes, and these are both very capable vehicles. We've driven the R1T, like you said, Nathan. Andre had the opportunity to drive the R1S. Both of them very high-tech vehicles. I think arguably, if you look at the R1T, more high-tech than the Lightning in some ways. It charges faster. It's more of the kind of desirable vehicle to have if you're into adventuring and outdoorsy type stuff, whereas the Lightning is more of like a work truck.
By comparison, I would agree. Also, the R1T is a smaller truck than the Ford F-150 Lightning. It's more of a mid-sized truck. It's just a little bit bigger than a mid-sized truck, but it is definitely smaller. Still, it has very good capacity. It potentially will have very good range when the bigger battery comes out. I drove it. I thought it was fantastic. And Andre drove the R1S, and once again, that is a brother to this vehicle. They have very similar powertrains. But it's a different wheelbase and a different length as well. It's smaller.
Yes, and the R1S seems to be also very kind of nice as a full-size SUV. We're not actually seeing that many full-size SUVs, right? Everyone wants to make a crossover, but it's great that Rivian is giving options for people who want 3 rows, let's say.
Yeah, that definitely looks like it's going to be a competitor. And bear in mind, and once again, it's one of the few in the class that actually offers that much space, that size, and yet it's an EV. So pretty extraordinary. Let's move on to the Subaru Solterra. Now, we don't work with Subaru very often. Their PR company doesn't give us vehicles. However, we do have opportunities to either have members of TFL Studios or our friends drive their vehicles. And recently, Alex Dykes, who's close with us, Alex on Autos, did get quite a bit of time behind the wheel of the Solterra. There's two different, and essentially the Solterra is the Toyota BZ4X with a little bit more going on in terms of a little bit more off-roading and slightly different exterior and interior design. A lot of people think that the Solterra is better looking than the BZ4X, and that's all up to you guys. Range is between 222 miles and 228 miles. It has according to them, a conservative battery degradation index. So it supposedly will last a very long time without losing too much power if you charge it the right way.
Yeah, to me, that seems like a little bit of hedging just to make up for the fact that, honestly, the range is not particularly competitive. This is not a cheap vehicle. Now, you do get standard all-wheel drive, and if you're looking for a moderately priced electric off-roader, this is one of your only options. It's, well cheaper than the Rivian. So there's that. But even though we haven't looked at this, our friend Alex Dykes has, like you said, Nathan. Tommy, I think, did look at the BZ4X, which this just shares a lot with, frankly. You might like it more if you prefer the black plastic cladding that Subaru puts on versus Toyota.
Yeah, they do have a slightly different exterior design, and I think Subaru's is trying to look a little bit more off-roady.
Breaking news happened in between the filming and publishing of this video. Toyota has sold over 200,000 eligible EVs or plug-in hybrids, meaning that the federal tax credit will no longer be given as the full amount for the BZ4X. It'll be halved for the next 6 months and diminished from then on. That said, everything else Nathan and I say about the BZ4X in the following segment still stands.
Actually, I kind of prefer the BZ4X, only because, aside from the fact that you can get the $42,000 front-wheel drive version of it, it also seems like it just has a lot of that Toyota vibe going on with it, which I think some people do prefer. 222 to 252 mile range. Now, according to the automaker, in terms of its overall capacity, interior comfort, and everything else, it's sized slightly bigger inside than, say, a Toyota RAV4, which, even though the wheelbase is very similar to it, because it just has a flat battery and all that, obviously it's a very different type of platform. So a lot more room in there and a lot more in terms of its overall utility, but range is an issue.
Yes, and if you saw the pictures of the yoke from several months ago, don't worry. The version, at least in the US here, has a steering wheel.
Thank goodness.
Toyota.
I'm not one for that yoke. And Toyota, and this really did start with Tesla. The yoke is something that supposedly makes it a lot easier to see your instrumentation, and yet you could still drive your car effectively. I think that that's going to take a while for people to warm up to.
Cooler heads have prevailed, thankfully. But I think the biggest differentiator, the $42,000 starting price, is a little bit cheaper than a Solterra, but you're getting front-wheel drive.
Exactly. Let's move on to the Volkswagen ID4, another vehicle we have a lot of experience with. One of my spouse's best friend actually owns one of these. And I would say that one of the more simple vehicles in this class in terms of crossover EVs. It seems like everybody wants to build a crossover EV anyway. Starts at $41,000, and you get 3 years of unlimited EA charging, 275 mile estimated EPA range. However, there will soon be I believe, rear drive version of it coming out, which is actually going to be built here in the United States. And that one will be supposedly less expensive, and it should have a pretty good range because lighter weight. But I don't know what that number is yet.
Yeah. It's, already a pretty affordable car. And I think that 3 years of Electrify America charging is a really sweet deal when you're looking at gas prices at the moment.
Oh, yeah.
Which makes this not the most exciting EV, but if you do need transportation, Volkswagen seems to kind of be going back to the roots in some ways and providing a very pragmatic, safe option.
And bear in mind that Volkswagen is soon going to introduce a slew of EVs, including the ID Buzz, which is their all-electric minivan, van, whatever you want to call it, and a lot of other. I believe overseas they've already introduced a small car version of this platform.
The ID3, which is more comparable to the Golf.
Exactly. To
the detriment of many enthusiasts here who love hatchbacks, we don't get the ID3 yet.
Which is a bummer. We're going to end this with the Volvo C40 and XC40 Recharge Pure Electric.
Yes, and very similar to the Polestar, premium, somewhat priced vehicle that is kind of selling you more on its design than particularly performance or range for the money.
Correct. Now, Tommy actually took one of these up to the ranch and put it on our, what we call our easier course, which essentially is built for crossovers that don't have a lot of ground clearance and perhaps are not built for off-roading because they don't have off-roading tires and lockers and all that stuff. He brought this there and it did very well.
Yes, and what's on screen here is the C40, which stay tuned for more on TFL, but the C40 and the XC40 are very similar. The C40 is just, in my opinion, a little more sharply styled, marginally more aerodynamic. I think it gets about 2 miles more of range, and Volvo, in classic fashion, at least modern Volvo, is charging you through the nose for that premium. I think it's about $8,000 extra for the C40 versus the XC40 Recharge.
Well, there you go. We've covered all the vehicles that are currently available for a tax credit. Whether or not you're able to get the full credit is entirely based on your income. So check that out. Go online and make sure that you can get it, right?
Yes, please do. And thank you so much, Nathan, for joining me. If people want to see everything that TFL does, where can they go?
Well, they go to alltfl.com. It's our one-stop shopping for all of our crazy channels because we have way too many of them, including TFL EV.
Thanks so much.